Hey, welcome back to True-Moto-Resto, and welcome back to Amateur Hour. I'm about to show you what I did when I did the valve clearance adjustment on the ZX7 engine. Worked out okay in the end, but yeah, it was a long way around to get there. Stay tuned. So like I said in the intro, yeah, this I cannot claim this to be an instructional video on how to do valve clearances. I can only show you the process that I went through, because this is only the second or third time that I've done a valve clearance for a shim under bucket type of engine. Yeah, it didn't go exactly as to plan, because I did make one very crucial mistake, but it all worked out fine in the end. So that said, let me show you what I did. All right, so it is valve clearance adjustment day, and so I'll just kind of recap briefly on sort of where I'm at and what I've done so far. So factory shop manual, and the basic process here is there's kind of two top dead center positions where you can do all your measurements. So when you rotate the crankshaft, and you can see here there's a T mark which lines up perfectly with that notch on the crankcase. So one position you can measure kind of all the valves on cylinder 4, you can do the exhaust on cylinder 3 and the intake on cylinder 2, and then you rotate it again till you come back to that same T position, and then you can measure intake and exhaust on 1, exhaust on 2, and intake on number 3. So once you've got all of those measurements recorded, so I've got this worksheet here, and because I'm paranoid, and this is kind of not my forte, I've only done it a few times with the shim and bucket method. I actually went back and I did the measurements again, because some of them I felt were either, you know, was I pushing it a little too tightly, or were they a little too loose a fit, and all of that kind of thing. So I went back and I redid all of my measurements, and I've got it on this big sheet here because it's easier to see as opposed to trying to decipher what I've got on this little sheet. And I went back and I did all my measurements again, and they were a little bit different. So I've double checked it, I've triple checked it, and so now I'm at a place where I don't have to do, so this is, here's my sheet, okay? Cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these are the buckets and the shims for each of those cylinders. So there's this one I don't need to touch because it's in spec. This one I don't need to touch because it's in spec. These ones are in spec, but they're kind of right on the borderline. So depending on what kind of shims I have available, I might reshim these guys. But there's 4 that need to be shimmed for sure, and then there's kind of 2 that are optional. So what I've got here, this is my existing clearances as I've measured in millimeters for all of those 8 clearances on the exhaust side. Intake is fine, exhaust not so fine, so we're gonna kind of stick with just doing the exhaust side. So recorded all the existing clearances. The existing shim sizes I will put in here because I haven't got the shims out yet. These are the target clearances, and I've just put 0.24 millimeters in here for the moment, because the clearance for the exhaust valves is 0.2 to 0.29. So anywhere in that range is acceptable, which is kind of why these are still in spec. And depending on what sort of, as I said, if I have shims available to reshim these, I might do that. But I'm just kind of aiming right in the middle for now. And if I'm struggling with shim sizes, it gives me a bit of room to be either slightly above or below that, and then it's still in spec. So it's the same target all the way across, and then I can kind of vary that as I need to. So once I know the existing shim size, and I know the difference between where I am and where I need to be, I can calculate the new shim size, and that's what's going to go in here. And then once everything is back together, I'll go back through and remeasure everything again and then re-record that. So that's kind of the plan. So where am I now? So nothing is taken apart yet. All I've done is position this crank on top dead center. So the T mark is aligned with the notch. And the sprockets, you can see there's an exhaust mark on the exhaust cam that sort of points level with the top of the cylinder on that side, and then the intake level with the top of the cylinder on that side. Now what I also have done, because I'm paranoid and I have a little bit of OCD, is I've also marked the sprocket and the chain with a Sharpie on this side, and I've also marked it on this side as well. And the only reason I've done that is because it makes me feel better. So when I go to, I'm not taking this cam out at all, but when I take this cam out, once the chain is loosened, to me it just seems to make more sense, and it's easier when I put this camshaft back in, and when I get the sprocket in the right place. If I know right away that this link is going to line up with that mark on the sprocket, then I'm not guessing if I'm going to be a tooth off. I'm going to have to, pull it out and put it back in again. It just seems to me that it just makes way more sense, and it's a whole lot easier to know that when this thing goes back together, if all these Sharpie lines are marked up, that once that cam tensioner goes back in, this is going to snug up just as nice as it is now with everything lined up. I'm not going to be taking things apart to reposition stuff. So that's my my logic behind that. So the process will now be, I'll have to remove the cam chain tensioner, and then once the cam chain tensioner is removed, I will be loosening the cam caps off in sort of 3 stages gradually, because once this is loosened off, the only thing keeping the camshafts on is these caps, and as you loosen them, the camshafts want to lift out because the valves are kind of pushing, the valve springs are pushing up on the camshaft, and in turn the camshaft is pushing up on this stuff. So you want it to all be loosened off evenly, so you kind of start at the middle, work your way out in 3 stages, and they'll all come up and even and at the same time. You don't want to just kind of be randomly pulling out bolts in one place or another and have the tension too much in one particular area, because the last thing you want to do is to snap or crack one of these caps, because you can't really replace these individually. Even if you found some, you can't replace them, because you basically have to replace the entire head, because these are what they call line board. So what that means is when they manufacture the heads and the caps at the factory, the caps are kind of in place when it's bored in some way or another through this way to take the camshaft. So these are basically matched to the head. If you were to buy a different set of caps for this head, they wouldn't be perfectly aligned, and the camshaft wouldn't necessarily run true or without binding in the cap. So that's the best way I can explain it. I'm not sure if that's clear or not, but these are basically bored and married together and matched at the factory. That's the bottom line. So the last thing I want to be doing is buggering up these caps, so you've got to be careful there. So yeah, and the other thing I'm going to do first is I'm just going to loosen this this bolt on the end. So that gives me, later on, that'll give me access to the mechanism which will retract this tensioner. You can probably put it in a vise and crack that off later on, but it just seems easy to me just to loosen that off now. And then once you loosen these 2 bolts and start to remove this tensioner, you cannot put it back in. So this is not one of those spring-loaded plungers that kind of moves in and out in this sort of direction just on a spring. Okay, what it is there's a screw. It's almost like a spiral. I don't know if you it's a spiral spring or what it is, but in order to retract the plunger, you actually have to turn. There's a tensioner in there that you have to turn with this little, I'll show you the thing I made for that later, but you have to crank it down. You can use a screwdriver, those kinds of things, and it will retract. But if it will shoot out, but it won't come back in, if you get what I mean. So if you take the screwdriver out after you've cranked it back, if you take that screwdriver out, it'll kind of uncoil and it'll push the plunger forward and tension the chain. So if you're taking these bolts out and you move the tensioner out, as you're moving the tensioner out, that plunger is moving this direction. So if you try to push this back in and crank it down, now you're going to over tighten the chain, risk damaging that because it will not retract the plunger. Okay, you have to use the mechanism to wind it back in. I've kind of rambled on a little bit there, but that's the bottom line on that. Okay, here is the tensioner. So let me kind of show you here so you can see how this thing does not push back in. So this thing is rock solid. Okay, it doesn't spring back in this way. I'll show you later on when we go to reinstall it. When I put the tool inside here through this end and you kind of crank it down, that's what will retract this. Okay, so my preferred method, again, I've not done this a ton of times, but any time where I'm taking off this kind of stuff, these kind of bolts, I like to use a breaker bar just to give everything kind of a quick snap, just to make sure that the bolts come off properly. I don't sort of bend and snap bolts in the process, and I find, you know, the quick snap method seems to work for me. Alright, get everything loosened off. The other thing to note here is that the outside bolts, these ones, are longer bolts than the inside ones. So if you're putting them back together and there's any sort of question about which bolts go where, then that is just something to note. Again, I'm being careful when I remove these things. In some of these, I believe there are some dowels in some spots and potentially some O-rings. So you don't want to be losing any of that sort of stuff. So the one locating dowel is actually still in the cap there. You can see here there's this is, I guess, where the oil galleries are with the O-ring, and that's what provides the oil pressure up and comes over to the other set of caps on this side. So try to move that. Basically what I've tried to do here is I'm gonna move this camshaft, the intake cam, over a little bit to give myself a little bit of room to maneuver the exhaust cam out. That's as far as that is going. So I've got my trusty magnet here. I'm going to pull these, all these guys are coming out, all of these buckets. That's the plan anyway. If I can get them out. Oh, it doesn't want to move. This one's coming. You see in there the shim is stuck to the underside of the bucket there. So. Okay, so when it comes to measuring the actual size of the shims, like this, many times the shims they do have a marking on them, a size marking. The last time I did a ZX7, the 1989, the markings on the shims had no correspondence whatsoever to the actual size of the shim. So I think the easiest way is just to measure them. I do have a set of outside micrometers, except they're not metric. And to be honest, I have no clue how to use them. They're real old school ones. They're not digital. And because I'm not comfortable in using those, I'd rather use these in millimeters, and it's going to get me as close as I need to be. I'm going to zero my calipers. .55. Okay, so now it's time for doing some math. So basically the mathematics have to be done now is basically calculating the difference between the existing clearance and the desired clearance. So this is kind of a good easy example. 0.14 to 0.24 means that I need to go up 0.1 millimeters on the shim size. Do I? Or do I have to go down one? Hang on a minute. Let me get my brain working. Okay, brain is re-engaged. So I have to go down on the shim size. So to go up in the clearance, you need to go down on the shim size. So from 2.55 to 2.45. Does that make sense? The smaller the shim, the more the clearance. There. Crystal clear. So now I've got to go down on this shim size by 0.14, which will take me from 0.10 to 0.24. So that's 0.14 difference. So I have to reduce this shim size by 0.14, which will be 2.42. All right, so I got my Hot Cams shim kit. And thankfully I had the foresight to replenish any of the shims that I was kind of short on when after I did the 89 ZX7. So how many decimal places are these at? Oh yeah, we got 2 decimal places, so we might be lucky. But the thing is, unfortunately, they don't have all of the sizes that I actually need. So for instance, there is no 2.42. Move the camera, there we go. So these are the first 2 shim sizes I'm looking for. 2.45, not a problem. I got tons of them. This is what they go from 2.4 to 2.45. So this is where you end up having to. So that's a good one. That's good. 2.4. Let's see what this one measures at. This one measures at 2.41. So that will be okay. All right, so I went back through and I've done some additional measurements again, remeasured a few things. I did find a shim that was the 254 that I was looking for here, so I'm going to leave that as it is. On these shims, there's stamped on here is the shim size. When you put this back in the bucket, you want to make sure that that stamping is facing down inside the bucket this way, so that the valve, the head of the valve there, is not riding on that. That way you'll be able to preserve the that stamping for a later time. Okay, so now I've got all the right shims in the right buckets. They're all in there. Everything's done. And then these ones can go back into the shim kit as spares. So now it's putting the buckets back in the head. This probably isn't completely necessary given I've only just taken this stuff apart, but I am going to put a little bit of assembly lube on here just because I have it. And okay, so I've got the exhaust stamp. You want all the stamped markings and the bolts facing the right direction. You don't want to put these things in backwards. Has to go. There we go. Those are lined up. All my Sharpie marks are lined. Also, you've got the cam chain that isn't yet tightened up, and so because it's not tightened up, the actual timing marks initially are not going to be perfectly lined up. You can see there they're off a little bit, but as long as I'm gonna have to rotate this a little bit again because that's kind of shifted on me a little bit. So I'm gonna have to realign that crank, and then hopefully that brings everything into alignment once we start to retension everything. All right, so realign that mark. It was only off by a little bit just because I was monkeying with the chain, right, to get that that camshaft in there. It's gonna kind of rejig things just a little bit. So it's still not perfectly aligned, but I'm trusting that once everything is clamped down, you can see this one is kind of up a little bit on that side. This one is down a little bit, but my marks that I put on the chain are all exactly where they should be. So at the end of the day, that tells me that once these things are bolted down on the caps and the tensioner goes in, this should all be properly aligned. So we're about to find out if that's a true statement. All right, so this is the part that worries me the most. I just don't like this part. I just find it quite worrying that I just don't want to break anything, if you know what I'm saying. All right, so I've gotten to the point now where I can start to torque these down. They're all kind of snugged up, just kind of gently hand tight. So 12 Newton meters on the torque wrench. I'm sure everybody knows this already, but when you're not using your torque wrench, you just make sure it's backed off all the way. You don't want any tension on it. So I'm going to do these to 8 Newton meters to start with, and then I'll work my way up to 12. So you may have seen this in the 89 ZX7 episode. So I'm just going to take out the bolt for the end of this, and I'll show you what's inside. Okay. So inside there, if you can see that, get up close. Maybe it's a bit easier to see. There, that's better. You see, there's a kind of like there's an outer section which is kind of raised with kind of 4 slots in it, and then way down in the inside there you'll see like a screw head. So the tool that I made basically attaches to the screw head, so you can wind it back in, and then you can push it in so that it latches onto one of these notches on the outside. I had a piece of steel kicking around. That's really all it is. This piece here acts as, this is the screwdriver piece, and then these little shoulders here on each side are what locks into the edge of the tensioner. So basically you stick that in there like that, and you can wind it. So let me see if I can show you this working. Take these bolts out so I don't lose them. So it's in there. You wind it clockwise and you can see that retracting, right? If I let that go, it would just spin, and it would allows the plunger to go all the way out. So like I mentioned earlier, it'll spring load out, but it won't spring load back in. You have to wind it back in. So that's what I'm doing here. Oh, see, if you pull it out a bit too far and it loses its bite on that screw head, then you're there. So now I've locked it in. You can see down there. See, I pushed that in far enough now that it locks in that little cross tab there. That should be far enough back, I think. Maybe I'll try one little bit further. There. One more turn on it. So now that's locked in. That plunger stays recessed. And now I can reinstall that. So that can now go back in there. I'm keeping my finger on that little screwdriver tool that I made just so it doesn't pop out. It's in all the way, it's not torqued down yet, but I can slowly remove this tool. I'm going to give the crankshaft a slow turn just to see if that helps me. Because I need to. Yeah, so as soon as you start to turn it, it just tightens that right up. So before I put there's an O-ring in there that I got to be careful I don't lose. I'm going to put the bolt back in. Lose that. See what I get here. The moment of truth. Did I do it correctly? Or... Okay, so I'm just completely stumped now. This is really ticking me off. For the ones that... I've only got one that I reshimmed that's where I expect it to be. Every single one of them, okay, I went down a shim size or two. Every single one. The shim sizes were smaller. But 3 of the 4, I can't get any clearance at all. I've rotated everything a couple of times. Everything rotates over just fine. If I went down a shim size on everything, which I did, then there's no reason that the clearances should be even less. So I even went to the valve clearance adjustment chart for the exhaust valves, where you can look at your present shim size, look at your existing valve clearance, and it'll tell you the shim size that you need to put in. And I'm accurate by the book. 2.40, 2.40, 2.55, and you know, I was putting in the 254, looking for a 242 or 241. I ended up putting in the 240 shims that measured out about those measurements. So all the shim sizes went down. They all went down to the correct specification. Why I have no clearances anymore on 3 of the 4, I don't know. I can only start guessing. I'm gonna have to take this thing apart again. So what I did also check is, on these ones I never changed them. I did take them out, but I never changed them because they were still in spec, but I did pull the buckets and the shims out, and I just put the ones back in that were already there. And I also have no clearance on these. So my hypothesis is that I must have, I don't know, maybe is it possible that I put the buckets and the shims in incorrectly somehow? I don't know how that would have happened on. Alrighty, I think I now understand what I did wrong. Shim sizes I think are all fine. I'm going to double check them, as I said, but when I pulled the buckets off, the shims were not kind of sitting in here. I made the mistake of putting the shims kind of like that in the center of the bucket and using the magnet to put them in. And what I think ended up happening is, instead of sitting in the seat in there, they were kind of sitting on slightly on the edge here. And so my mistake was that I should have put the shims in here and then put the buckets on top. What a numbskull. All right, so there you go, live and learn. So the valve shims are now sitting on top of there. There's no recess in the inside of these at all to hold those, so you really have to put them in the pocket right here in the slot, and then once they're in like that, then you can put the buckets on top. So hey, live and learn. All right, I've got everything back together for a second time. Everything is torqued down. Cam chain is nice and snug again. Everything is timed. So I'm going to give this a couple of cycles. And then I'm going to check my clearances again. There we go. Well, let's hope I get the right numbers this time. We're good. That's so lesson learned. So obviously this is not a watch the experienced mechanic teach you how to do a valve clearance adjustment. This is watch the idiot in the workshop blunder his way through valve clearance adjustment. So the good news is I learned something. At the end of the day, there is no damage done. It's I mean, that's why you check everything after you do your rotation by hand to make sure nothing was binding. It felt fine. It's just that those shims were not seated properly in the top of the valve. So there we go. I can now put the cam cover back on there, and I can actually start reassembling this thing now. So my decals arrived. So this is all of the ZXR stuff. A little bit different than the ZX7 Ninja stuff, but yeah, it's gonna be great. And then the other thing that I got, if I can find it, here it is. This is a piece of the silver vinyl these decals are made of, and that means I can go to the paint shop now and match the silver paint that I need to buy with the decal. So that'll look far better if I can get a color match off that. Two ways that's going to happen is they've got an optical color scanner, so they'll be able to scan that and give me a pretty close match. And if they can't generate it for any reason off that, then they've got those color swatches where they have a little hole in the middle of the the paint chip, and then you can just kind of slide this underneath and see which one matches best. So either way, that'll work. So I've got that. And then the other thing that came in with those decals is an extra set of these e-box frame decals, because when I ordered the decals for the 89, I forgot to order these decals that go right on there. So now I can put those on. There we go. It just kind of finishes off the 89 there. It was bugging me that was missing. So I just finished cleaning up and painting part of the toolbox and seat mount bracketry there. I went through my parts bin, and these are the ones I decided not to use. And this stuff I didn't paint, it's just kind of been cleaned up. Needs a little bit more of plastic product on the tool tray itself, but this piece I didn't paint. It was in pretty nice shape, and I only want to paint stuff that doesn't need to be painted. But the front bracketry, this one was a little bit worse. It was fairly rusty, but again, it wasn't too bad. But this one is a little bit better. I just threw a fresh coat of paint on it, so once that's dried, get the toolbox reassembled. So there you go. There's a video on how not to do a valve adjustment. No idea why I made that mistake. I did not do it that way on the 89 ZX7 when I did that one, but I don't know, my head wasn't thinking clearly, but luckily it all worked out okay in the end. What a monkey, right? Holy smokes. I think I've said this before. I'm pretty sure there's got to be a YouTube channel out there somewhere where chimpanzees are wrenching on bikes doing valve clearance adjustments. You probably should go and watch that one. It'll probably be more accurate than this one as far as tutorials go. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really does help the channel. And we'll see you in the next video, hopefully with no mistakes this time.